The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Sheriff Karen stood frozen in the crowd, her face drained of color as she realized what was happening. The very land she had tried to steal from me was now mine to sell, and she would have to buy it back, at whatever price I chose. Going once, going twice, the auctioneer called out. I watched her fumble for her phone with shaking hands. That is when I knew justice was finally mine. My name is Robert, and for 43 years I called the Double R Ranch home. 3 generations of my family had worked this land, turning wild prairie into productive pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see. Every morning, I woke to the sound of cattle lowing and the gentle creak of windmills turning in the Texas breeze. The ranch sat on 200 acres of prime land, bordered by oak trees my grandfather planted and fences my father built with his own hands. I knew every rock, every creek bed, every patch of soil like the lines on my weathered palms. This was not just property to me. This was legacy. This was home. Our small town of Cedar Falls had always been the kind of place where neighbors helped neighbors. When old Mrs. Patterson needed her hay baled, the whole community showed up. When the Johnson family lost their barn to a tornado, we rebuilt it in 3 days. I served on the volunteer fire department for 15 years and never missed a town council meeting. Life was simple and good. I raised Black Angus cattle, grew hay for winter feed, and maintained the land the way my family always had. The work was hard but honest. The pay was modest but steady. I went to bed each night with the satisfaction that comes from a day well spent. But change was coming to Cedar Falls, whether we wanted it or not. A development company from Dallas had purchased land on the east side of town. They were building what they called Prairie Vista Estates, a planned community with golf courses and swimming pools. The houses started at $500,000, which was more money than most of us saw in 5 years. With the new development came new people, city folks who complained about roosters crowing and the smell of cattle. They formed a homeowner association and demanded better roads, street lights, and what they called improved municipal services. Most of us longtime residents just shrugged and went about our business. We figured they would adapt or move on. I should have paid more attention to the politics. I should have seen the warning signs. But I was too busy living my life to notice the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Sheriff Karen Martinez won the election by promising to modernize law enforcement and bring professional standards to rural policing. She had come from a big city department and talked about efficiency, accountability, and community partnerships. The campaign flyers showed a stern-faced woman in a crisp uniform, arms crossed, staring directly at the camera. I first met her on a Tuesday morning in October. I was moving cattle from the south pasture to the north grazing area, a routine I had performed hundreds of times. The county road runs right through my property, and I always used proper signals and took care to clear the path quickly. Sheriff Karen pulled up in her brand-new patrol car just as I was closing the gate. She stepped out wearing mirrored sunglasses and a uniform so starched it could stand up by itself. Everything about her screamed authority, from her perfectly straight posture to the way she rested her hand on her service weapon. "You need a permit for that," she said without introduction. I stopped what I was doing and walked over to her. "Excuse me. Moving livestock across public roadways requires a special permit. You are in violation of County Ordinance 247B. I had been moving cattle across that same stretch of road for 20 years. My father had done it before me, and his father before him. No one had ever said anything about a permit. "Ma'am, I have never heard of such a thing. My family has been." She held up her hand to cut me off. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, mister. She paused and looked at her clipboard. Mitchell, I am going to give you a warning this time, but you need to get proper documentation from the county clerk within 72 hours. The whole interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but something about it felt wrong. The way she looked at my property like she was taking inventory. The way she wrote notes on her clipboard long after our conversation ended. The way she drove slowly past my gate before finally leaving. That evening, I called my neighbor Jake, who had served as sheriff for 12 years before retiring. I told him about the permit requirement. Bob, there is no such ordinance, he said. I would know. I helped write half the county codes myself. Then why would she? I do not know, but you better watch yourself. Word around town is she has connections to that development company. Her brother-in-law sits on their board of directors. I hung up the phone with an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Sheriff Corinne's patrol car parked at the Prairie Vista sales office. Her deputies conducting routine patrols that always seemed to bring them past my property. The way she smiled and waved at the new residents while treating long-time locals like criminals. The harassment started small. A citation for having my mailbox 6 inches too close to the road. A noise complaint about my dog's barking, filed by someone who lived 2 miles away. A surprise inspection of my cattle loading chute that resulted in a list of safety violations that would cost $3,000 to fix. Each incident by itself seemed minor, almost petty, but together they formed a pattern. Sheriff Corinne was not just enforcing the law, she was waging a campaign, and for reasons I could not yet understand, I was her primary target. The citations started arriving weekly, then daily. My kitchen table became a graveyard of yellow violation notices, each one more ridiculous than the last. Excessive dust during harvest season. Livestock odors exceeding acceptable limits. Operating farm equipment before 7 a.m. on weekdays. Sheriff Corinne had apparently discovered every obscure county ordinance ever written and decided to enforce them all on my property. I spent more time at the courthouse than on my ranch, fighting bogus charges and paying fines that drained my savings account. The worst part was not the money, it was the humiliation. Sheriff Corinne made sure to conduct her surprise inspections when other people were around to witness them. She would arrive with multiple deputies, lights flashing, making a spectacle of writing citations for violations that existed only in her imagination. Mr. Mitchell, your fence posts are 3 inches too tall according to Municipal Code 45C. She announced one morning in front of a group of my neighbors who had stopped by to help with spring branding. I had checked that code myself. There was no height restriction on fence posts, but arguing with her in public only made me look guilty, so I stood there and took another citation while my friends watched in uncomfortable silence. The stress was eating me alive. I started having trouble sleeping, jolting awake at every sound, thinking it might be another late-night patrol car cruising slowly past my house. My appetite disappeared. My blood pressure spiked. For the first time in my adult life, I considered selling the ranch and moving somewhere else. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in June. I was hosting my annual community barbecue, a tradition my family had maintained for over 30 years. Families from all over the county gathered for food, music, and friendly competition. It was one of the few events that still brought the whole town together. Sheriff Corinne arrived just as we were serving lunch, accompanied by 4 deputies and what appeared to be a health inspector. She marched through the crowd like she owned the place, writing citations for everything from unlicensed food service to inadequate parking facilities to failure to post proper signage. "This event is now shut down," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Everyone needs to leave the premises immediately." 47 people watched in stunned silence as she broke up a gathering that had been held peacefully for 3 decades. Families packed up their food and loaded their children into cars, shooting apologetic looks in my direction as they drove away. I stood alone in my empty yard, surrounded by tables full of untouched food and decorations that suddenly seemed pathetic. That was the moment I finally understood what was happening. This was not about permits or ordinances or public safety. This was about driving me away. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of citations. The fines now totaled over $15,000. My legal fees had already cost me another $8,000. At this rate, I would be bankrupt within 6 months. I thought about my grandfather, who had built this ranch from nothing during the Great Depression. I thought about my father, who had fought in Korea and come home to expand the operation. I thought about all the dreams and sweat and sacrifice that had gone into making this place what it was. Then I thought about Sheriff Karen and her smug smile as she destroyed my family's legacy one citation at a time. Something hardened inside my chest, like steel cooling in a forge. If she wanted a fight, I would give her one. But I would fight on my terms, using weapons she did not expect. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the best attorney in the county. Attorney Sarah Coleman had a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers would not touch. Her office walls were covered with newspaper clippings about corruption trials and civil rights victories. When I walked into her office on Monday morning, she already knew who I was. "The whole town is talking about what happened at your barbecue," she said, gesturing for me to sit down. "That was completely illegal. Sheriff Martinez cannot shut down a private event on private property without a court order." I handed her the stack of citations. She flipped through them, her eyebrows rising higher with each page. "This is harassment, plain and simple. Half of these ordinances do not even exist. The other half are being misapplied." She looked up at me with sharp eyes. "The question is why? What does she want?" "My land," I said. "It has to be about my land." Sarah nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Your property sits right between the new development and the main road. If someone wanted to expand Prairie Vista or build commercial properties, your ranch would be the logical target." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I began digging into Sheriff Karen's background and connections. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Her brother-in-law was not just on the development company's board. He was the majority owner. Sheriff Karen herself owned stock in 3 related companies that would benefit from commercial development in our area. But the real bombshell came when Sarah discovered the sheriff's financial records through a public information request. Karen Martinez was deeply in debt. Her mortgage was underwater. Her credit cards were maxed out. She needed money badly, and my ranch represented a quick solution to her problems. "Look at this," Sarah said, spreading documents across her desk. She purchased stock in Lone Star Development 2 weeks before she was sworn in as sheriff. Then she immediately began targeting property owners who might interfere with their expansion plans. The pattern became clear once we started mapping it out. 3 other ranchers had been driven away by similar harassment campaigns over the past year. All of their properties had been sold to shell companies connected to Lone Star Development, all at prices well below market value. But Sheriff Karen had made one crucial mistake. She had gotten greedy and overplayed her hand. The documentation of her harassment campaign was extensive and obvious. The financial connections were easy to trace. Most importantly, she had assumed I would fold like the others had. "We have enough evidence to file federal civil rights charges," Sarah told me. "This is textbook abuse of power under color of law. She could go to prison." That sounded satisfying, but I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness and frustration she had put me through. I wanted her to lose everything she had tried to steal from me. "What if we fought fire with fire?" I asked. Sarah leaned back in her chair. "What do you mean?" "She used legal technicalities to harass me. What if we used legal technicalities to destroy her?" A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. "Tell me what you are thinking." I pulled out a folder I had been working on at home. Inside were property records, tax assessments, and financial documents I had obtained through public records requests. At the bottom was a foreclosure notice that had been filed against the Prairie Vista HOA. "The homeowner association is broke," I explained. "They overextended themselves building amenities, and now they owe more than the land is worth. The bank is going to auction their debt next month." Sarah's eyes widened as she understood what I was suggesting. "You want to buy their debt and foreclose on them?" "I want to own the very land they tried to steal from me. Then I want to sell it back to them at auction. Let them see how it feels to be on the wrong end of the system." The next month was the most intense period of my life. While maintaining the appearance of a defeated rancher, I was actually orchestrating the most complex legal maneuver I had ever attempted. Sarah Coleman became more than my attorney. She became my partner in what she called the most beautiful revenge plot she had ever seen. The first step was gathering every piece of evidence documenting Sheriff Corin's harassment campaign. Sarah's paralegal helped me organize 18 months' worth of citations, photographs, witness statements, and financial records. We created a timeline showing how each bogus violation coincided with developments in the Prairie Vista expansion project. The smoking gun came when we discovered Sheriff Corin's personal emails through a Freedom of Information Act request. She had been careless, using her official email account to communicate with her brother-in-law about property acquisitions. One message, sent just 2 days after my barbecue was shut down, was particularly damning. "The Mitchell problem should resolve itself within 60 days, she had written. "Once he defaults on the fines, we can move forward with the commercial zoning application." But the most crucial element of my plan required careful financial planning. The HOA's debt package was going to auction for $1.2 million. I needed to raise that money without alerting anyone to my intentions. Sarah helped me structure a series of loans using my ranch as collateral, spreading the borrowing across multiple banks to avoid attention. "You are betting everything on this," she warned me during one late-night planning session. "If something goes wrong, you could lose your ranch anyway." "I am going to lose it anyway if we do nothing," I replied. "At least this way I go down fighting." The second part of the plan required patience and perfect timing. Sarah filed civil rights complaints with the FBI and the State Attorney General's office, but she asked them to hold off on any public action until after the debt auction. We needed Sheriff Corin to feel secure and in control right up until the moment we pulled the rug out from under her. Meanwhile, I had to maintain the charade of being a defeated man. I continued paying the bogus fines, kept my head down, and avoided any actions that might make Sheriff Corin suspicious. It was the hardest acting job of my life, pretending to be broken while secretly preparing for war. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered that the HOA had defaulted on more than just their construction loans. They owed back taxes, unpaid contractor bills, and penalties for environmental violations. The total debt package was actually worth more than $2 million, but it was being auctioned as a single lot for the primary mortgage amount. "This is incredible," Sarah said, reviewing the auction documents. "Whoever buys this debt will own everything: the land, the buildings, the golf course, even the individual home lots that have not been sold yet, including the lots where Sheriff Corinne and her brother-in-law live. Especially those lots. They are both behind on their HOA fees." I spent sleepless nights walking the fence lines of my ranch, thinking about what I was about to do. This was not just revenge anymore. It was justice. Sheriff Corinne had used her badge to steal from honest people. She had corrupted the system for personal gain. She had destroyed the peace and security of families who had never done anything but try to live quiet, productive lives. The auction was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the county courthouse. Sarah and I arrived early and sat in the back row, watching as Sheriff Corinne's brother-in-law paced nervously near the front. He had arranged financing to buy back the debt, but his loan approval was contingent on the auction price staying below $1.5 million. I had arranged financing for $2.8 million. When the auctioneer called for opening bids, I felt my heart racing like it had not since my first cattle auction 40 years earlier. This was it. Everything I had worked for, everything my family had built, was riding on the next few minutes. The bidding started at $800,000. It climbed steadily as several investors competed for the package. Sheriff Corinne's brother-in-law bid aggressively, reaching his limit at $1.45 million. Then I raised my hand and bid $1.5 million. The courthouse fell silent when I made my bid. Every head turned to look at the weathered rancher in the back row who had just outbid the brother-in-law of the county sheriff. I could see the confusion on people's faces, the whispered conversations, the sudden tension that filled the room like electricity before a storm. Sheriff Corinne's brother-in-law, David Martinez, looked like he had been struck by lightning. He fumbled with his phone, probably calling his sister to ask what the hell was happening. The auctioneer asked if there were any higher bids. David raised his hand shakily. $1,600,000. I did not hesitate. $2 million. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. David's face went white as he realized he was outgunned. He made one desperate attempt at $2.1 million, but I countered with $2.5 million without even blinking. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a sound like thunder. Sold to bidder number 17. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room following my movement. The clerk called my name to complete the paperwork, and the whispers turned into shocked conversations. Robert Mitchell, the harassed rancher everyone thought was broke and beaten, had just purchased the entire Prairie Vista development. David Martinez pushed through the crowd toward me, his face flushed with anger and panic. "This is impossible. You do not have that kind of money." I looked him straight in the eye. "Your sister taught me a lot about legal technicalities. I learned how to use the system just like she did." Sarah appeared at my side with a briefcase full of legal documents. "Mr. Martinez, my client is now the legal owner of all Prairie Vista properties, including the home where you currently reside. You have 30 days to bring your account current or face eviction proceedings." The color drained from his face completely. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," I replied. "You can ask your sister about how serious I am when it comes to enforcing legal technicalities." Within an hour, news of the purchase had spread throughout Cedar Falls. My phone started ringing before I even got back to the ranch. Local reporters wanted interviews. Neighbors called to congratulate me or ask if the rumors were true. Most importantly, Sheriff Corinne called. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded without preamble. "I am exercising my legal rights as a property owner," I said calmly. "The same rights you have been violating for the past 18 months. This is not over, Mitchell. You have no idea who you are messing with." "Actually, I know exactly who I am messing with. I know about your financial problems. I know about your stock purchases. I know about your emails to your brother-in-law. Most importantly, I know about your abuse of power." The line went quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. "What do you want?" "I want justice, and I want you to feel what it is like to lose everything you care about. We can work something out. I can drop all the citations, clear your record." "Too late for that, Corinne. You should have thought about working something out before you destroyed my family's barbecue." I hung up the phone and walked outside to check on my cattle. For the first time in 18 months, I felt at peace. The evening sun painted the pastures gold, and the wind carried the familiar sounds of home. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. That night, Sarah and I met to plan the next phase. Now that I owned the Prairie Vista development, I had several options. I could operate it as a rental property, generating income while my enemies paid me rent. I could develop it further, using Sheriff Corinne's own expansion plans against her. Or I could do something that would send a message heard throughout the county. "I want to auction it all," I told Sarah. "Every lot, every building, every blade of grass. I want them to have to buy back their own homes at whatever price the market will bear." Sarah grinned. "That is absolutely diabolical and completely legal. When can we schedule it? How does next month sound?" The auction announcement hit Cedar Falls like a Category 5 hurricane. Within 24 hours of Sarah filing the public notice, my phone was ringing off the hook. Lawyers representing Prairie Vista residents demanded meetings. Local politicians tried to negotiate. Sheriff Corinne herself showed up at my ranch, not in her official capacity, but as a desperate woman watching her world collapse. I was mending fence when she arrived, driving her personal car instead of the patrol unit. She looked different without the uniform and badge. Smaller, more human, but I felt no sympathy for her as she walked across my pasture. "Please," she said without preamble, "we need to talk." I continued working on the fence post, not looking at her. "I believe we covered everything in our last conversation." "You do not understand. There are families involved here, children, elderly people who will lose their homes. You should have thought about families when you were harassing mine." She stood there for several minutes watching me work. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "What will it take to stop this?" I set down my tools and faced her directly. "I want your resignation. I want a public apology. I want admission of guilt for every false citation you issued. And I want criminal charges filed against you for abuse of power." "I cannot do that. My career would be over." "Your career is already over. The only question is whether you go out with some dignity or get dragged out in handcuffs." She left without another word, but I knew she would be back. Desperate people do desperate things, and Sheriff Corinne was running out of options. The auction was scheduled for the first Saturday in October, giving residents 30 days to arrange financing or find alternative housing. The local newspaper ran daily stories about the Prairie Vista crisis, interviewing distraught homeowners and legal experts who debated the ethics of my actions. I did not care about the criticism. These were the same people who had stood by silently while Sheriff Corinne destroyed my life. They had chosen sides when it mattered, and now they were dealing with the consequences. The morning of the auction dawned clear and cold. I arrived at the courthouse steps to find a crowd of nearly 300 people. Television crews from 3 major cities had set up cameras. Protesters held signs demanding justice for Prairie Vista families. Sheriff Karen stood near the front, flanked by her brother and several lawyers. The auctioneer explained the rules as I took my seat in the front row. Each property would be sold individually to the highest bidder. Current residents would have the right of first refusal if they could match the winning bid within 24 hours. Otherwise, they would have 90 days to vacate. The first property up for auction was Sheriff Karen's house. The irony was not lost on anyone present, as the auctioneer described the 4-bedroom colonial with attached garage and professionally landscaped yard. Bidding started at $50,000 and quickly climbed as investors recognized the opportunity. Sheriff Karen bid frantically, her voice cracking as the price passed $200,000. She was leveraging everything she owned, borrowing against her pension, begging family members for money. At $275,000, she reached her limit. The winning bid was $315,000, submitted by a real estate investor from Dallas. Sheriff Karen's face crumpled as she realized she was about to lose her home, the same home she had threatened to take from me 18 months earlier. Property after property sold for prices well above market value. The media attention and investor interest had created a feeding frenzy. By the end of the day, I had sold $2.8 million worth of real estate for $4.2 million. But more importantly, I had sent a message that corruption has consequences. Sheriff Karen lost her house. Her brother lost his investment. Dozens of people who had supported their harassment campaign were forced to face the reality of their choices. Justice, it turned out, had a very specific price tag. The aftermath of the auction unfolded exactly as I had hoped. Within a week, Sheriff Karen submitted her resignation, citing personal reasons in a brief statement that fooled no one. The state attorney general's office announced a criminal investigation into her conduct, using the evidence Sarah and I had carefully compiled over the previous months. Federal civil rights charges followed shortly after. The FBI had been building their own case based on complaints from other ranchers Sheriff Karen had harassed. My documentation provided the final pieces they needed to secure indictments for conspiracy, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The criminal trial was held 6 months later. I testified for 3 hours about the systematic harassment campaign, showing the jury photographs of my property, reading aloud the bogus citations, and explaining how each violation had been designed to drive me toward bankruptcy. When the prosecutor asked how the harassment had affected my life, I told them about the sleepless nights, the financial stress, and the humiliation of watching my family's barbecue destroyed in front of my neighbors. Sheriff Karen was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to the ranchers she had harassed. Her brother-in-law received 2 years for conspiracy. The development company paid $2.3 million in civil settlements and agreed to new oversight measures for future projects. But the most satisfying moment came during the victim impact statements. I stood before the judge and spoke directly to Sheriff Karen for the last time. "You thought you could use your badge to steal my family's legacy," I said. "You thought a simple rancher would not fight back against corruption. You were wrong about both things. The system you tried to abuse has held you accountable, and my ranch is stronger than ever." She did not look at me during my statement. She sat with her head down, finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless in the face of justice. The money from the Prairie Vista auction allowed me to expand my operation and modernize my equipment. I purchased additional acreage from neighbors who wanted to retire, growing the Double R Ranch to over 400 acres. Most importantly, I established a legal defense fund to help other rural landowners fight harassment from corrupt officials. The fund has helped 12 families so far, providing legal representation and documentation support for ranchers, farmers, and small business owners facing similar persecution. Sarah Coleman serves as the fund's primary attorney, using the experience she gained from my case to fight corruption throughout the region. Life in Cedar Falls returned to normal, but it was a different kind of normal. People had learned that corruption could be defeated, that the system could work when good people refused to give up. My annual barbecue resumed, bigger than ever, with families from 3 counties attending to celebrate community and justice. On quiet evenings, I still walk the fence lines my grandfather built, watching the sun set over pastures that have been in my family for 3 generations. The land looks the same, but I see it differently now. It is not just my heritage anymore. It is proof that ordinary people can defeat powerful enemies when they refuse to surrender their principles. Sheriff Karen tried to steal my legacy. Instead, she gave me something more valuable. She gave me the knowledge that justice delayed is not justice denied, as long as good people are willing to fight for what is right. The ranch endures, justice prevails, and sometimes, if you are patient and determined enough, you get to watch your enemies pay for their crimes with interest.